Ladies and gentlemen, sawabona, hoyadag, good evening, and welcome back. Molueni. Folks, today I'd like to talk to you very briefly on the occasion of South Africa's Freedom Day, April 27th, 2020. First, my heartfelt congratulations to South Africans of all ethnicities from around the world who live in South Africa or find themselves abroad on this day. This what should be a happy occasion for South Africa, April 27th, 2020, the 26th anniversary of the all-race first genuine democratic elections in South Africa. Happy Freedom Day to folks. A rather muted day as folks are unable to congregate and celebrate together or even have braais together in the midst of the Wuhan coronavirus, COVID-19 by its scientific name. Today, President Cyril Ramaphosa from the African National Congress gave an address to the nation in which he talked on a day that we normally call for unity and talk about hope for South Africa, and said some wonderful things about South Africa. He also said some very troubling things, of which I'll discuss a few of those as we go forward. So as I mentioned, some great comments on Freedom Day, but also some troubling commentary in a speech that should be inspiring and uniting South Africans. Cyril Ramaphosa chose several times instead to bifurcate and divide society, and I'll talk about that. Now, early in his speech, he rightly points out liberation-era heroes in South African history who contributed to ending apartheid and the system of racial oppression. And of course, he talks about folks like Chief Albert Luthuli, and of course, Nelson Mandela, Oliver Reginald Tambo, Steve Biko, Sobukwe, lots of others. And it's wonderful that he talks about these liberation-era luminaries who contributed to ending the system of apartheid. He also harkens back to the pre-South African era when it was a collection of colonies and African kingdoms, and he refers to folks like, for instance, he talks about King Cetshwayo of the Zulu, who fought in the Boer or the British War with the British Zulu War. So King Cetshwayo he also talks about King Hintsa, a renowned Xhosa king who fought in the Xhosa Boer Wars from a century prior, and then Chief Makanda, who was also a prophet for the Xhosa people. So it's great that he reflects back on these luminaries. What is troubling about this, however, is that he took the time to mention liberation-era heroes, yet not a single person that he mentioned was a white South African. Now, not being a South African, I can look to my own thoughts and think of a handful of people who come to mind who ought to have received some recognition on Freedom Day for their contributions to end apartheid. People like Dennis Goldberg, a member of Umkhonto we Sizwe, who was also tried for terrorism for his conduct, a white South African who contributed directly to. Now, I don't advocate terrorism, and I don't hold MK in particularly high regard for their actions during the struggle, but he was a ANC luminary and a person that was not mentioned by the president today. Helen Suzman, who for decades fought in the South African parliament to end apartheid and fought against the apartheid regime, not mentioned. Harry Schwartz, not mentioned. Helen Zille. Now, I don't expect her to be mentioned because, unfortunately for the ANC, she's a member of the Opposition Democratic Alliance, which makes her fair game in the ANC's mind, and they've said truly horrific things about her and misrepresented her. But people forget that she was a member of the Black Sash movement. She was a journalist who exposed the police murder of Steve Biko, and her own personal risk, her family's risk, the chance of being banned, her life being threatened. She was an anti-apartheid champion and a hero, and that is wiped away and not mentioned. Helen Zille. What about Brayton Breitenbach? Brayton Breitenbach was not mentioned, an author whose writings made it possible for those outside South Africa to become familiar with what was actually happening under apartheid in South Africa. Or Andre Brink, another famous South African, white South African author whose writings made many of us outside South Africa aware of it, not mentioned, made major contributions to the struggle and the liberation of South Africa. Alan Paton, or Alan Payton, depending on pronunciation, not mentioned at all. Or Byers Naud, who from the pulpit fought and struggled against apartheid. My point is that the struggle against apartheid was not a white and black issue. It was a South African against South African issue, a minority regime and those who opposed it. Those who opposed it were not simply black South Africans. They were black, they were white, they were colored, they were Asian. And also a number of people from abroad who opposed the system of racial segregation and discrimination. And it is shameful for President Cyril Ramaphosa to paint this in terms of a black and white issue, which is what he's done here. Make no mistake about it. The mentioning of the people he mentioned and excluding others is intentional. It's not an oversight. It's not an accident. Now, let's turn to his speech and some of the things he said here. He said in the speech that an ever-present reminder of everything we've achieved as a young democracy and everything we hope to achieve is founded on the will of the people. Indeed, it is founded on the will of people, if only it were decided by the will of the people rather than the will of the party. Under South Africa's political system, the party takes precedence over the state, and the African National Congress has repeatedly shown in its 26 years in power, much like the National Party demonstrated from 1948 to 1994, that the will of the party trumps the will of the people. As we saw when white South Africans were given the opportunity to vote on whether apartheid should continue in 1992, overwhelmingly 63% of them voted to end apartheid. So the will of the people under the National Party was often subverted, and the will of the people under the ANC is often subverted. So if only the will of the people is what mattered. What else did he say here? Well, he says, I should mention that he points out some successes of the African National Congress, and they should be lauded for some of their successes. At, we'll call it independence 1994, for lack of a better term. At independence in 1994, only 33% of South African homes had electricity of any sort. Today, it's 86%. There was a backlog of millions of homes, over 5 million homes shortfall. Today, some 2.2 million people still do not have formal housing, at least 2.2 million people. That's the government's figure. It's probably more than that. But to be fair, the population has risen from 43 million to 57 million, and most of that population increases come in poor South African communities who are already in formal housing. So that is an enduring problem for them. But they have had great success in building homes, schools, hospitals, clinics, and developing universities to some degree. But more importantly, providing sanitation, water, electricity to many South Africans who never had access to such services before. The ANC should be credited and lauded for this. But much of this occurred from 1999 to 2005. Little of this occurred from 2006 to 2020. And that should draw attention. Also in his speech today, he talked about we've been hard at work to rebuild our economy and strengthen our institutions. While I would disagree with hard at work, I would say that the ANC's macroeconomic policies have not strengthened the economy, certainly not since 2005. Largely, they've undermined the economy and pushed it into recession repeatedly with their black economic empowerment and now their expropriation without compensation and their national health insurance schemes. These things have undermined entrepreneurialism and they've damaged South Africa immeasurably, contrary to what the president has said. He also says that we've accelerated programs to give our people access to land and return land to those who are forcibly removed. Well, who are our people, President Ramaphosa? Who exactly are our people? Is it the Xhosa people? Is it the Zulu people? The Pedi? The Tswana speakers? The Basotho people? Gullards? Afrikaners? English speakers? Who exactly are our people? It doesn't sound like you're addressing our people as a nation, a multiracial nation. You seem to be talking about our people and return land to those who were forcibly removed. Absolutely. That was the whole deal behind CODESA in the early 1990s, the agreement that was forged to allow a democratic South Africa to take place rather than having a civil war or another couple decades under apartheid. The agreement was that land could be returned to those who were forcibly removed after 1910, since there was no country of South Africa prior to 1910. Yet since 1995, the ANC has done very little. It has done some things to return land, and it doesn't share that with people. What I mean it's done very little is chronically underfunded the department responsible for purchasing land, providing services to those who get the land, and providing grants and such. Very little, chronically underfunded it, and they've devoted very little in the way of resources to purchase land. They've also had expropriation possible since the Constitution came in effect in 1997, and they have not used it. Instead, they want to tell the world today that they have to confiscate land because of historical inequities, when they wasted $7.1 billion buying useless arms that the South African National Defense Force did not need and did not ask for, and money swindled through the Oilgate program, selling the national stockpile of oil, the Travelgate scandal, the Nkandla scandal, state capture, the Guptas. Must I continue? They have not been serious about restoring land to South Africans who had land dispossessed from them. Now, this is one of the more troubling things. This is the endless boogeyman that will always be part of the African National Congress's statements whenever it comes to failure. Now, to be fair, some of this can be attributed to failure, and let's talk about that. Specifically, President Ramaphosa felt the need on the second page of his comments to say, but the devastating legacy of our past runs so deep that at times we ourselves have found wanting in addressing the suffering it has subjected our people to. So that, in essence, ladies and gentlemen, is an excuse. is an excuse by the African National Congress to lay blame for their failures, their macroeconomic policy failures, their policy failures, of which there are plenty. Now, they have success, but they have plenty of failures. To not accept any responsibility for those failures and to blame it on the past, specifically apartheid, but more the fashion these days is to blame it on the colonial period, all the way back to the 17th century. Not recognizing that the country did not exist and that Europeans were not engaged with most of the Bantu peoples until sometime after that time frame. So once again, the president, rather than accepting responsibility for the ANC's failures. Now, I understand this. He's a politician. This isn't supposed to be a speech about failure, but this statement should not be in there unless he's willing to address how the ANC has failed, how they've not budgeted funds to the department responsible for purchasing land and providing to people, how they've not worked with commercial farmers and with small-scale farmers to get land distributed to people in the agricultural sector who would like to be farmers. Rather, they've turned into a political issue based on race and distorted the argument about land being taken and expropriated. There's no doubt that land was taken, especially under apartheid, and people, even as late as the 1980s, 3.5 million black South Africans were relocated from their land and dispossessed of the land under apartheid, even as it was waning. So no doubt this is a legitimate topic, but the inclusion of this this disclaimer, blaming racism, apartheid, and the colonial period for all of South Africa's woes is simply disingenuous and dishonest and does very little at reconciliation. One of the things he talks about in his early comments here, reconciliation. There's no effort at reconciliation with this comment. This is an effort to blame one group of South Africa, and in this case, a minority group these days that doesn't hold political power by and large, and it's unhealthy. Moving beyond that, he talks about the triumph of 1994 was about much more than being able to vote. Indeed, it was. 1994 and the end of the apartheid era was only a little bit about people's right to vote. It was also about freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom of association, freedom of trade, and ending a race-based discriminatory system, which is ironic because now we have ANC policies that are race-based, that discriminate against South Africans and a minority at that, to the benefit of others based on skin pigmentation, rather than fix the structural problems in the South African economy. This is what they're doing. All right, so President Ramaphosa says it was about leveling the field for the black child and the white child and making sure that each have an equal chance in life. Well, I love those words. They're fantastic, and it would be wonderful. But I would argue that the ANC's policies have not achieved that. I agree with him. But they've simply enriched the connected few, blamed others, and essentially have divided all in the country, particularly along racial lines. That's what the ANC's policies have been achieving for the last decade at least. The promise made on the 27th of April 1994 can no longer be deferred. Now, this is an interesting comment by President Cyril Ramaphosa. What do you mean deferred? The ANC has had unassailable control of the national government for the entire 26 years in the post-apartheid era. They've also had control of all the provinces except the Western Cape, and they even had control of that briefly. And they've controlled all the metropolitans in South Africa, with the exception of Cape Town, until 2016, when they also lost control of Nelson Mandela Bay, of Johannesburg, and of Tshwane, where Pretoria, the capital, is located. They now have control of Johannesburg once again through another coalition, and a coalition in Nelson Mandela Bay. So the ANC controls, for nearly all of its history, everything except Cape Town, the Western Province. What is going on? How is it that they talk about the promise can no longer be deferred? The ANC, for most of this time period in the national parliament, has even had the ability to amend the Constitution at will. Now, I will credit them for having been restrained and only amending it on occasions when it was arguably appropriate, and not simply willy-nilly amending the Constitution, because they've had 2/3 majority for almost the entire period that they've been in command of the country. Yet, the dream has been deferred. Why has the dream been deferred? And more importantly, to this point, President Cyril Ramaphosa has been the Secretary General of the African National Congress from 1991 to 1997. That includes 3.5 years under majority rule as the Secretary General of the ANC, leading ANC policy. He's also served as the Deputy President of the African National Congress from 2012 until 2018. And he served as the Deputy President from 2014 until 2018, when he became the President. If you add all that time together, in the 26 years of ANC-led governance in South Africa, Ramaphosa has been in government in an influential position to affect and change policy to help poor South Africans, in particular poor black South Africans, for over 11 years of those 26 years. So how is the dream deferred? And who's responsible for this? The apartheid government? No. White South Africans? Only the white South Africans who were part of the ANC, of which there are plenty. Certainly not the opposition. So who's to blame for the last 26 years and the failures? You can crow about the successes, of which there are some. And arguably early in its history, there were plenty of successes by the ANC. But blaming others for your failure, enriching the few cadres who are connected, and dividing people based on race is not a recipe for healthy governance. So, he also says that, now this is a particularly disturbing thing in light of what's happening. The government has locked down people around the country with the most draconian lockdown on the planet. People not allowed to leave their homes for only the barest of reasons can they leave their homes. And it's been over a month now that this has been going on in South Africa. And so only now, after a month, are we seriously, adequately addressing those who are in desperate need of help, food, medicines. They don't have the resources. So President Ramaphosa throws this line out, and this is a particularly disturbing line. In a country beset by violent crime long before COVID-19, in a country in which home invasions are the norm for many people, and most South Africans of all races have been attacked and been victims of violent crime at one time or another, in a country like this, to pit the haves against the have-nots when it's the government who's causing this crisis at the moment and its macroeconomic policies, which have contributed to poverty in South Africa. To pit the haves against the have-nots is particularly distressing, especially given that as a percentage of the haves, it tends to be more white South Africans, Indians, and coloreds than it is black South Africans. But this is a very disturbing line that he puts in here that looks rather innocuous in his Freedom Day speech. His intent, I hope, is to point out that some people are able to weather the storm of COVID-19 with the lockdown. They have the resources. And that's what he could have said. But instead, these are his exact words on the third page of his comments. President Cyril Ramaphosa said, some people have been able to endure the coronavirus lockdown in a comfortable home with a fully stocked fridge, with private medical care and online learning for their children. Well, yes, that would be an awful lot of white South Africans, but also all of the South African ANC cadres, members of parliament, local ward councillors, those cadres who've been enriched. That's who we're talking about here, ladies and gentlemen. So he says that for millions of others, this has been a month of misery, of breadwinners not working, of families struggling to survive, and of children going to bed and waking up hungry. Indeed, and I pointed this out before you went to a lockdown, Cyril Ramaphosa, what South Africa must do and how it must help those in need, including releasing some of the restrictions on the informal economy so that informal traders can go back to their business in a reasonable fashion. But no, the South African government chose not to do that. This was a choice to make these people hungry and not provide relief for them. The social relief measures announced last week that are now being implemented and are therefore as much about narrowing the gulf of inequality as they are about supporting vulnerable citizens through this trying time. Well, that's nice, but that's about a month too late, Mr. President Ramaphosa. You have addressed this issue far too late in the game. So here we have it, President Cyril Ramaphosa's remarks on Freedom Day, a day that should unify all South Africans. And instead, President Ramaphosa chooses to use the day to divide and bifurcate society yet again on income and socioeconomic status and race. It's unfortunate and it's sad to see this. When Ramaphosa became selected as the president of the ANC in December of 2017 and then acceded to the office of president in February 2018, millions of South Africans rejoiced that a moderate, successful businessman would lead South Africa into a brighter future. While I have no personal disdain for President Ramaphosa, I saw him as little more than another ANC cadre who is part of the corrupt system that's in place now and would not be the solution for South Africa. His conduct prior to the COVID-19 situation bears this out, and these comments today meant to intentionally divide people based on have and have not, on skin color, and a socioeconomic status is unfortunate. The good words that he said in today's commentary and greeting South Africans over the liberation struggle and Freedom Day are encouraging, but also discouraging. And ladies and gentlemen, I will say to all of you, rich, poor, white, Asian, colored, black South Africans, I wish you a wonderful Freedom Day, and I wish that all South Africans have the economic freedom and political freedom that they deserve, and it should come to you in the form of a multicultural, market-based capitalist society. And I hope that the ANC reforms itself from within and gets rid of policies that are destroying the country and stops dividing people based on race. We saw this before under the National Party and under the apartheid system. I'm not equating the two systems, but I am saying that we saw a party with absolute control of the government do what it desired for the good of the party and not necessarily for the good of the nation. Ladies and gentlemen, I thank you. If you enjoy the content, please feel free to subscribe to my channel by pushing that subscribe button right down there. Also, if you would like to be notified of upcoming streams and new videos, push the little bell icon. It'll give you personalized notifications. Also, feel free to add any commentary. If you have questions or positive or negative comments about what I've talked about, feel free to put that in the comment section below. And I ask that you give me a like on the video because likes drive viewership. The more people who watch it that like it, it's more likely that the YouTube channel will be promoted by YouTube. So thank you very much for tuning in. This has been an Indaba Africa production. This is Chris. I look forward to seeing you next time, and I hope you enjoyed my South African scarves on the wall and my Madiba tribute Sevens jersey. Ladies and gentlemen, have a pleasant day, and we'll see you next time here on Indaba Africa.